You are listening to the Chronicles of Josephus Audiobook. This is Antiquities of the Jews by Flavius Josephus. Book 3, chapters 5 through 9. In these chapters, Josephus records the descent of Moses from Mount Sinai, the completion of the Tabernacle, the sacred garments of the priests and the high priest, the establishment of Aaron's priesthood, and the laws governing sacrifices in ancient Israel. This audiobook is presented word for word, preserving the original historical account for study, reflection, and historical understanding. Let us now begin. This is the continuation for Book 3, Chapter 5 of the Antiquities of the Jews. Chapter 5. How Moses ascended up to Mount Sinai and received laws from God and delivered them to the Hebrews. 1. Now Moses called the multitude together and told them that he was going from them unto Mount Sinai to converse with God, to receive from him and to bring back with him a certain oracle. But he enjoined them to pitch their tents near the mountain and prefer the habitation that was nearest to God before one more remote. When he had said this, he ascended up to Mount Sinai, which is the highest of all the mountains that are in that country, and is not only very difficult to be ascended by men on account of its vast altitude, but because of the sharpness of its precipices also. Nay, indeed, it cannot be looked at without pain of the eyes, and besides this, it was terrible and inaccessible on account of the rumor that passed about that God dwelt there. But the Hebrews removed their tents as Moses had bidden them, and took possession of the lowest parts of the mountain, and were elevated in their minds, in expectation that Moses would return from God with promises of the good things he had proposed to them. So they feasted and waited for their conductor, and kept themselves pure as in other respects, and not accompanying with their wives for 3 days, as he had before ordered them to do. And they prayed to God that he would favorably receive Moses in his conversing with him, and bestow some such gift upon them, by which they might live well. They also lived more plentifully as to their diet, and put on their wives and children more ornamental and decent clothing than they usually wore. 2. So they passed 2 days in this way of feasting. But on the 3rd day, before the sun was up, a cloud spread itself over the whole camp of the Hebrews, such a one as none had before seen, and encompassed the place where they had pitched their tents. And while all the rest of the air was clear, there came strong winds, that raised up large showers of rain, which became a mighty tempest. There was also such lightning, as was terrible to those that saw it, and thunder, with its thunderbolts, were sent down, and declared God to be there present in a gracious way to such as Moses desired he should be gracious. Now, as to these matters, every one of my readers may think as he pleases, but I am under a necessity of relating this history as it is described in the sacred books. This sight, and the amazing sound that came to their ears, disturbed the Hebrews to a prodigious degree, for they were not such as they were accustomed to. And then the rumor that was spread abroad, how God frequented that mountain, greatly astonished their minds. So they sorrowfully contained themselves within their tents, as both supposing Moses to be destroyed by the divine wrath, and expecting the like destruction for themselves. 3. When they were under these apprehensions, Moses appeared as joyful and greatly exalted. When they saw him, they were freed from their fear, and admitted of more comfortable hopes as to what was to come. The air also was become clear and pure of its former disorders upon the appearance of Moses, whereupon he called together the people to a congregation, in order to their hearing what God would say to them. And when they were gathered together, he stood on an eminence whence they might all hear him, and said, God has received me graciously, O Hebrews, as he has formerly done, and has suggested a happy method of living for you, and an order of political government, and is now present in the camp. I therefore charge you for his sake and the sake of his works, and what we have done by his means, that you do not put a low value on what I am going to say, because the commands have been given by me that now deliver them to you, nor because it is the tongue of a man that delivers them to you. But if you have a due regard to the great importance of the things themselves, you will understand the greatness of him whose institutions they are, and who has not to disdain to communicate them to me for our common advantage. For it is not to be supposed that the author of these institutions is barely Moses, the son of Amram and Jochebed, But he who obliged the Nile to run bloody for your sakes, and tamed the haughtiness of the Egyptians by various sorts of judgments, he who provided a way through the sea for us, he who contrived a method of sending us food from heaven when we were distressed for want of it, he who made the water to issue out of a rock when we had very little of it before, he by whose means Adam was made to partake of the fruits both of the land and of the sea, he by whose means Noah escaped the deluge, he by whose means our forefather Abraham, of a wandering pilgrim, was made the heir of the land of Canaan, he by whose means Isaac was born of parents that were very old, he by whose means Jacob was adorned with 12 virtuous sons, he by whose means Joseph became a potent lord over the Egyptians, he it is who conveys these instructions to you by me as his interpreter. And let them be to you venerable, and contended for more earnestly by you than your own children and your own wives. For if you will follow them, you will lead a happy life. You will enjoy the land fruitful, the sea calm, and the fruit of the womb born complete, as nature requires. You will be also terrible to your enemies, for I have been admitted into the presence of God, and been made a hearer of his incorruptible voice. So great is his concern for your nation and its duration. For, when he had said this, he brought the people with their wives and children so near the mountain that they might hear God himself speaking to them about the precepts which they were to practice, that the energy of what should be spoken might not be hurt by its utterance by that tongue of a man, which could but imperfectly deliver it to their understanding. And they all heard a voice that came to all of them from above, insomuch that no one of these words escaped them, which Moses wrote on 2 tables, which it is not lawful for us to set down directly, but their import we will declare. 5. The first commandment teaches us that there is but one God, and that we ought to worship him only. The second commands us not to make the image of any living creature to worship it. The third, that we must not swear by God in a false matter. The fourth, that we must keep the 7th day by resting from all sorts of work. The 5th, that we must honor our parents. The 6th, that we must abstain from murder. The 7th, that we must not commit adultery. The 8th, that we must not be guilty of theft. The 9th, that we must not bear false witness. The 10th, that we must not admit of the desire of anything that is another's. 6. Now, when the multitude had heard God himself giving those precepts which Moses had discoursed of, they rejoiced at what was said, and the congregation was dissolved. But on the following days they came to his tent, and desired him to bring them, besides other laws from God. Accordingly he appointed such laws, and afterwards informed them in what manner they should act in all cases, which laws I shall make mention of in their proper time. But I shall reserve most of those laws for another work, and make there a distinct explication of them. 7. When matters were brought to this state, Moses went up again to Mount Sinai, of which he had told them beforehand. He made his ascent in their sight, and while he stayed there so long a time, for he was absent from them 40 days, fear seized upon the Hebrews, lest Moses should have come to any harm. Nor was there anything else so sad, and that so much troubled them, as this supposal that Moses was perished. Now there was a variety in their sentiments about it, some saying that he was fallen among wild beasts, and those that were of this opinion were chiefly such as were ill disposed to him, but others said that he was departed, and gone to God. But the wiser sort were led by their reason to embrace neither of those opinions with any satisfaction, thinking that as it was a thing that sometimes happens to men to fall among wild beasts and perish that way, so it was probable enough that he might depart and go to God, on account of his virtue. They therefore were quiet, and expected the event, yet were they exceeding sorry upon the supposal that they were deprived of a governor and a protector. Such a one indeed as they could never recover again, nor would this suspicion give them leave to expect any comfortable event about this man, nor could prevent their trouble and melancholy upon this occasion. However, the camp durst not remove all this while, because Moses had bidden them afore to stay there. 8. But when the 40 days and as many nights were over, Moses came down, having tasted nothing of food usually appointed for the nourishment of men. His appearance filled the army with gladness, and he declared to them what care God had of them, and by what manner of conduct of their lives they might live happily, telling them that during these days of his absence he had suggested to him also that he would have a tabernacle built for him, into which he would descend when he came to them, and how we should carry it about with us when we remove from this place, and that there would be no longer any occasion for going up to Mount Sinai, but that he would himself come and pitch his tabernacle amongst us, and be present at our prayers, as also that the tabernacle should be of such measures and construction as he had shown him, and that you are to fall to the work and prosecute it diligently. When he had said this, he showed them the 2 tables, with the 10 commandments engraven upon them, 5 upon each table, and the writing was by the hand of God. End of Book 3. Chapter 5. Chapter 6, concerning the tabernacle, which Moses built in the wilderness for the honor of God, and which seemed to be a temple. 1. Hereupon the Israelites rejoiced at what they had seen and heard of their conductor, and were not wanting in diligence according to their ability. For they brought silver and gold and brass, and of the best sorts of wood, and such as would not at all decay by putrefaction, camel's hair also, and sheepskins, some of them dyed of a blue color, and some of a scarlet. Some brought the flour for the purple color, and others for white, with wool dyed by the flowers aforementioned, and fine linen and precious stones, which those that use costly ornaments set in ouches of gold. They brought also a great quantity of spices, for of these materials did Moses build the tabernacle, which did not at all differ from a movable and ambulatory temple. Now when these things were brought together with great diligence, for every one was ambitious to further the work even beyond their ability, he set architects over the works, and this by the command of God, and indeed the very same which the people themselves would have chosen had the election been allowed to them. Now their names are set down in writing in the sacred books, and they were these: Bezaleel, the son of Uri, of the tribe of Judah, the grandson of Miriam, the sister of their conductor, and Aholiab, the son of Ahisamach, of the tribe of Dan. Now the people went on with what they had undertaken with so great alacrity that Moses was obliged to restrain them by making proclamation that what had been brought was sufficient, as the artificers had informed him. So they fell to work upon the building of the tabernacle. Moses also informed them, according to the direction of God, both what the measures were to be, and its largeness, and how many vessels it ought to contain for the use of the sacrifices. The women also were ambitious to do their parts, about the garments of the priests, and about other things that would be wanted in this work, both for ornament and for the divine service itself. Now when all things were prepared, the gold and the silver and the brass and what was woven, Moses, when he had appointed beforehand that there should be a festival, and that sacrifices should be offered according to everyone's ability, reared up the tabernacle. And when he had measured the open court, 50 cubits broad and 100 long, he set up brazen pillars, 5 cubits high, 20 on each of the longer sides, and 10 pillars for the breadth behind. Thus every one of the pillars also had a ring. Their chapiters were of silver, but their bases were of brass. They resembled the sharp ends of spears, and were of brass, fixed into the ground. Cords were also put through the rings, and were tied at their farther ends to brass nails of a cubit long, which at every pillar were driven into the floor, and would keep the tabernacle from being shaken by the violence of winds. But a curtain of fine soft linen went round all the pillars, and hung down in a flowing and loose manner from their chapiters, and enclosed the whole space, and seemed not at all unlike to a wall about it. And this was the structure of 3 of the sides of this enclosure. But as for the 4th side, which was 50 cubits in extent, and was the front of the whole, 20 cubits of it were for the opening of the gates, wherein stood 2 pillars on each side, after the resemblance of open gates. These were made wholly of silver and polished, and that all over, excepting the bases, which were of brass. Now on each side of the gates there stood 3 pillars, which were inserted into the concave bases of the gates, and were suited to them, and round them was drawn a curtain of fine linen. But to the gates themselves, which were 20 cubits in extent, and 5 in height, the curtain was composed of purple, and scarlet, and blue, and fine linen, and embroidered with many and diverse sorts of figures, excepting the figures of animals. Within these gates was the brazen laver for purification, having a basin beneath of the like matter, whence the priests might wash their hands and sprinkle their feet. And this was the ornamental construction of the enclosure about the court of the tabernacle, which was exposed to the open air. 3. As to the tabernacle itself, Moses placed it in the middle of that court, with its front to the east, that when the sun arose, it might send its first rays upon it. Its length, when it was set up, was 30 cubits, and its breadth was 10 cubits. The one of its walls was on the south, and the other was exposed to the north, and on the back part of it remained the west. It was necessary that its height should be equal to its breadth, 10 cubits. There were also pillars made of wood, 20 on each side. They were wrought into a quadrangular figure, in breadth 1.5 cubits, but the thickness was 4 fingers. They had thin plates of gold affixed to them on both sides, inwardly and outwardly. They had each of them 2 tenons belonging to them, inserted into their bases, and these were of silver, in each of which bases there was a socket to receive the tenon. But the pillars on the west wall were 6. Now all these tenons and sockets accurately fitted one another, insomuch that the joints were invisible, and both seemed to be one entire and united wall. It was also covered with gold, both within and without. The number of pillars was equal on the opposite sides, and there were on each part 20, and every one of them had the third part of a span in thickness, so that the number of 30 cubits were fully made up between them. But as to the wall behind, where the 6 pillars made up together only 9 cubits, they made 2 other pillars, and cut them out of 1 cubit, which they placed in the corners, and made them equally fine with the other. Now every one of the pillars had rings of gold affixed to their fronts outward, as if they had taken root in the pillars, and stood one row over against another round about, through which were inserted bars gilt over with gold, each of them 5 cubits long, and these bound together the pillars, the head of one bar running into another, after the nature of one tenon inserted into another. But for the wall behind, there was but 1 row of bars that went through all the pillars, into which row ran the ends of the bars on each side of the longer walls, the male with its female being so fastened in their joints that they held the whole firmly together. And for this reason was all this joined so fast together, that the tabernacle might not be shaken, either by the winds or by any other means, but that it might preserve itself quiet and immovable continually. 4. As for the inside, Moses parted its length into 3 partitions. At the distance of 10 cubits from the most secret end, Moses placed 4 pillars, the workmanship of which was the very same with that of the rest, and they stood upon the like bases with them, each a small matter distant from his fellow. Now the room within those pillars was the most holy place, but the rest of the room was the tabernacle, which was open for the priests. However, this proportion of the measures of the tabernacle proved to be an imitation of the system of the world. For that third part thereof, which was within the 4 pillars, to which the priests were not admitted, is, as it were, a heaven peculiar to God. But the space of the 20 cubits is, as it were, sea and land on which men live, and so this part is peculiar to the priests only. But at the front, where the entrance was made, they placed pillars of gold that stood on bases of brass, in number 7. But then they spread over the tabernacle veils of fine linen and purple, and blue and scarlet colors embroidered. The first veil was 10 cubits every way, and this they spread over the pillars which parted the temple, and kept the most holy place concealed within. And this veil was that which made this part not visible to any. Now the whole temple was called the holy place, but that part which was within the 4 pillars, and to which none were admitted, was called the Holy of Holies. This veil was very ornamental, and embroidered with all sorts of flowers which the earth produces, and there were interwoven into it all sorts of variety that might be an ornament, excepting the forms of animals. Another veil there was which covered the 5 pillars that were at the entrance. It was like the former in its magnitude, and texture, and color, and at the corner of every pillar a ring retained it from the top downwards half the depth of the pillars, the other half affording an entrance for the priests, who crept under it. Over this there was a veil of linen, of the same largeness with the former. It was to be drawn this way or that way by cords, the rings of which, fixed to the texture of the veil, and to the cords also, were subservient to the drawing and undrawing of the veil, and to the fastening it at the corner. That then it might be no hindrance to the view of the sanctuary, especially on solemn days, but that on other days, and especially when the weather was inclined to snow, it might be expanded, and afford a covering to the veil of divers colors. Whence that custom of ours is derived, of having a fine linen veil after the temple has been built, to be drawn over the entrances. But the 10 other curtains were 4 cubits in breadth and 28 in length, and had golden clasps, in order to join the one curtain to the other, which was done so exactly that they seemed to be one entire curtain. These were spread over the temple, and covered all the top and parts of the walls, on the sides and behind, so far as within 1 cubit of the ground. There were other curtains of the same breadth with these, but one more in number and longer, for they were 30 cubits long. But these were woven of hair, with the like subtlety as those of wool were made, and were extended loosely down to the ground, appearing like a triangular front and elevation at the gates, the 11th curtain being used for this very purpose. There were also other curtains made of skins above these, which afforded covering and protection to those that were woven, both in hot weather and when it rained. And great was the surprise of those who viewed these curtains at a distance, for they seemed not at all to differ from the color of the sky. But those that were made of hair and of skins reached down in the same manner as did the veil at the gates, and kept off the heat of the sun, and what injury the rains might do. And after this manner was the tabernacle reared. 5. There was also an ark made, sacred to God, of wood that was naturally strong, and could not be corrupted. This was called Aaron in our own language. Its construction was thus: its length was 5 spans, but its breadth and height was each of them 3 spans. It was covered all over with gold, both within and without, so that the wooden part was not seen. It had also a cover united to it by golden hinges after a wonderful manner, which cover was every way evenly fitted to it, and had no eminences to hinder its exact conjunction. There were also 2 golden rings belonging to each of the longer boards, and passing through the entire wood, and through them gilt bars passed along each board, that it might thereby be moved and carried about as occasion should require. For it was not drawn in a cart by beasts of burden, but borne on the shoulders of the priests. Upon this its cover were 2 images, which the Hebrews call cherubims. They are flying creatures, but their form is not like to that of any of the creatures which men have seen, though Moses said he had seen such beings near the throne of God. In this ark he put the 2 tables whereon the 10 commandments were written, 5 upon each table, and 2.5 upon each side of them, and this ark he placed in the most holy place. 6. But in the holy place he placed a table, like those at Delphi. Its length was 2 cubits, and its breadth 1 cubit, and its height 3 spans. It had feet also, the lower half of which were complete feet, resembling those which the Dorians put to their bedsteads, but the upper parts towards the table were wrought into a square form. The table had a hollow towards every side, having a ledge of 4 fingers' depth, that went round about like a spiral, both on the upper and lower part of the body of the work. Upon every one of the feet was there also inserted a ring, not far from the cover, through which went bars of wood beneath, but gilded, to be taken out upon occasion, there being a cavity where it was joined to the rings, for they were not entire rings. But before they came quite round, they ended in acute points, the one of which was inserted into the prominent part of the table, and the other into the foot, and by these it was carried when they journeyed. Upon this table, which was placed on the north side of the temple, not far from the most holy place, were laid 12 unleavened loaves of bread, 6 upon each heap, one above another. They were made of 2 tenth deals of the purest flour, which 10th deal in omer is a measure of the Hebrews, containing 7 Athenian catalo, and above those loaves were put 2 vials full of frankincense. Now after 7 days other loaves were brought in their stead, on the day which is by us called the Sabbath, for we call the 7th day the Sabbath. But for the occasion of this intention of placing loaves here, we will speak to it in another place. 7. Over against this table, near the southern wall, was set a candlestick of cast gold, hollow within, being of the weight of 100 pounds, which the Hebrews call chinchares. If it be turned into the Greek language, it denotes a talent. It was made with its knops and lilies and pomegranates and bowls, which ornaments amounted to 70 in all, by which means the shaft elevated itself on high from a single base and spread itself into as many branches as there are planets, including the sun among them. It terminated in 7 heads, in one row, all standing parallel to one another, and these branches carried 7 lamps, one by one, in imitation of the number of the planets. These lamps looked to the east and to the south, the candlestick being situate obliquely. 8. Now between this candlestick and the table, which, as we said, were within the sanctuary, was the altar of incense, made of wood indeed, but of the same wood of which the foregoing vessels were made, such as was not liable to corruption. It was entirely crusted over with a golden plate. Its breadth on each side was a cubit, but the altitude double. Upon it was a grate of gold, that was extant above the altar, which had a golden crown encompassing it round about, whereto belonged rings and bars, by which the priests carried it when they journeyed. Before this tabernacle there was reared a brazen altar, but it was within made of wood, 5 cubits by measure on each side, but its height was but 3, in like manner adorned with brass plates as bright as gold. It had also a brazen hearth of network, for the ground underneath received the fire from the hearth, because it had no basis to receive it. Hard by this altar lay the basins, and the vials, and the censers, and the cauldrons, made of gold, but the other vessels, made for the use of the sacrifices, were all of brass. And such was the construction of the tabernacle, and these were the vessels thereto belonging. End of Book 3, Chapter 6. Book 3, Chapter 7, concerning the garments of the priests and of the high priest. 1. There were peculiar garments appointed for the priests, and for all the rest, which they call kohanoio, or priestly garments, as also for the high priests, which they call kahanoi rabbai, and denote the high priest's garments. Such was therefore the habit of the rest. But when the priest approaches the sacrifices, he purifies himself with the purification which the law prescribes. And in the first place, he puts on that which is called makanas, which means somewhat that is fast tied. It is a girdle composed of fine twined linen, and is put about the privy parts, the feet being to be inserted into them in the nature of breeches, but above half of it is cut off, and it ends at the thighs, and is there tied fast. 2. Over this he wore a linen vestment, made of fine flax doubled. It is called chethon, and denotes linen, for we call linen by the name of kethon. This vestment reaches down to the feet, and sits close to the body, and has sleeves that are tied fast to the arms. It is girded to the breast a little above the elbows, by a girdle often going round, 4 fingers broad, but so loosely woven that you would think it were the skin of a serpent. It is embroidered with flowers of scarlet and purple and blue and fine twined linen, but the warp was nothing but fine linen. The beginning of its circumvolution is at the breast, and when it has gone often round, it is there tied, and hangs loosely there down to the ankles. I mean this, all the time the priest is not about any laborious service, for in this position it appears in the most agreeable manner to the spectators. But when he is obliged to assist at the offering sacrifices, and to do the appointed service, that he may not be hindered in his operations by its motion, he throws it to the left and bears it on his shoulder. Moses indeed calls this belt albineth, but we have learned from the Babylonians to call it emia, for so it is by them called. This vestment has no loose or hollow parts anywhere in it, but only a narrow aperture about the neck, and it is tied with certain strings hanging down from the edge over the breast and back, and is fastened above each shoulder. It is called massabazanus. 3. Upon his head he wears a cap, not brought to a conic form nor encircling the whole head, but still covering more than the half of it, which is called masna imphathis. And its make is such that it seems to be a crown, being made of thick swathes, but the contexture is of linen. It is doubled round many times and sewed together, besides which A piece of fine linen covers the whole cap from the upper part and reaches down to the forehead and hides the seams of the swaths, which would otherwise appear indecently. This adheres closely upon the solid part of the head, and is thereto so firmly fixed that it may not fall off during the sacred service about the sacrifices. So we have now shown you what is the habit of the generality of the priests. 4. The high priest is indeed adorned with the same garments that we have described, without abating one. Only over these he puts on a vestment of a blue color. This also is a long robe, reaching to his feet. In our language it is called mir, and is tied round with a girdle, embroidered with the same colors and flowers as the former, with a mixture of gold interwoven. To the bottom of which garment are hung fringes, in color like pomegranates, with golden bells, by a curious and beautiful contrivance, so that between two bells hangs a pomegranate, and between two pomegranates a bell. Now this vesture was not composed of two pieces, nor was it sewed together upon the shoulders and the sides, but it was one long vestment, so woven as to have an aperture for the neck, not an oblique one, but parted all along the breast and the back. A border also was sewed to it, lest the aperture should look too indecently. It was also parted where the hands were to come out. 5. Besides these, the high priest put on a third garment, which was called the ephod, which resembles the epimis of the Greeks. Its make was after this manner. It was woven to the depth of a cubit, of several colors, with gold intermixed and embroidered, but it left the middle of the breast uncovered. It was made with sleeves also, nor did it appear to be at all differently made from a short coat, but in the void place of this garment there was inserted a piece of the bigness of a span, embroidered with gold, and the other colors of the ephod, and was called essen, the breastplate, which in the Greek language signifies the oracle. This piece exactly filled up the void space in the ephod. It was united to it by golden rings at every corner, the like rings being annexed to the ephod, and a blue riband was made use of to tie them together by those rings, and that the space between the rings might not appear empty. They contrived to fill it up with stitches of blue ribands. There were also 2 sardonyxes upon the ephod, at the shoulders, to fasten it in the nature of buttons, having each end running to the sardonyxes of gold, that they might be buttoned by them. On these were engraven the names of the sons of Jacob, in our own country letters, and in our own tongue, 6 on each of the stones, on either side, and the elder sons' names were on the right shoulder. 12 stones also there were upon the breastplate, extraordinary in largeness and beauty, and they were an ornament not to be purchased by men because of their immense value. These stones, however, stood in 3 rows, by 4 in a row, and were inserted into the breastplate itself, and they were set in ouches of gold that were themselves inserted in the breastplate, and were so made that they might not fall out. The first 3 stones were a sardonyx, a topaz, and an emerald. The second row contained a carbuncle, a jasper, and a sapphire. The first of the third row was a ligure, then an amethyst, and the third an agate, being the 9th of the whole number. The first of the 4th row was a chrysolite. The next was an onyx, and then a beryl, which was the last of all. Now the names of all those sons of Jacob were engraven in these stones, whom we esteem the heads of our tribes, each stone having the honor of a name, in the order according to which they were born. And whereas the rings were too weak of themselves to bear the weight of the stones, they made 2 other rings of a larger size at the edge of that part of the breastplate which reached to the neck, and inserted into the very texture of the breastplate, to receive chains finely wrought, which connected them with golden bands to the tops of the shoulders, whose extremity turned backwards and went into the ring on the prominent back part of the ephod. And this was for the security of the breastplate, that it might not fall out of its place. There was also a girdle sewed to the breastplate, which was of the forementioned colors, with gold intermixed, which when it had gone once round, was tied again upon the seam, and hung down. There were also golden loops that admitted its fringes at each extremity of the girdle, and included them entirely. 6. The high priest's mitre was the same that we described before, and was wrought like that of all the other priests, above which there was another, with swathes of blue embroidered. and round it was a golden crown polished of 3 rows, one above another, out of which arose a cup of gold, which resembled the herb which we call saccharus. But those Greeks that are skillful in botany call it hyoscyamus. Now, lest any one that has seen this herb but has not been taught its name, and is unacquainted with its nature, or, having known its name, knows not the herb when he sees it, I shall give such as these a description of it. This herb is oftentimes in tallness above 3 spans, but its root is like that of a turnip, for he that should compare it thereto would not be mistaken, but its leaves are like the leaves of mint. Out of its branches it sends out a calyx, cleaving to the branch, and a coat encompasses it, which it naturally puts off when it is changing, in order to produce its fruit. This calyx is of the bigness of the bone of the little finger, but in the compass of its aperture is like a cup. This I will further describe for the use of those that are unacquainted with it. Suppose a sphere be divided into 2 parts, round at the bottom, but having another segment that grows up to a circumference from that bottom. Suppose it become narrower by degrees, and that the cavity of that part grow decently smaller, and then gradually grow wider again at the brim, such as we see in the navel of a pomegranate with its notches. And indeed, such a coat grows over this plant as renders it a hemisphere, and that, as one may say, turned accurately in a lathe, and having its notches extant above it, which, as I said, grow like a pomegranate, only that they are sharp, and end in nothing but prickles. Now the fruit is preserved by this coat of the calyx, which fruit is like the seed of the herb Ceteritis. It sends out a flower that may seem to resemble that of poppy. Of this was a crown made, as far from the hinder part of the head to each of the temples. But this Ephelis, for so this calyx may be called, did not cover the forehead, but it was covered with a golden plate, which had inscribed upon it the name of God in sacred characters. And such were the ornaments of the high priest. 7. Now here one may wonder at the ill will which men bear to us, and which they profess to bear on account of our despising that deity which they pretend to honor. For if any one do but consider the fabric of the tabernacle, and take a view of the garments of the high priest, and of those vessels which we make use of in our sacred ministration, he will find that our legislator was a divine man, and that we are unjustly reproached by others. For if any one do without prejudice and with judgment look upon these things, he will find they were every one made in way of imitation and representation of the universe. When Moses distinguished the tabernacle into 3 parts, and allowed 2 of them to the priests as a place accessible and common, he denoted the land and the sea, these being of general access to all. But he set apart the 3rd division for God, because heaven is inaccessible to men. And when he ordered 12 loaves to be set on the table, he denoted the year as distinguished into so many months. By branching out the candlestick into 70 parts, he secretly intimated the decani, or 70 divisions of the planets. And as to the 7 lamps upon the candlesticks, they referred to the course of the planets, of which that is the number. The veils, too, which were composed of 4 things, they declared the 4 elements. For the fine linen was proper to signify the earth, because the flax grows out of the earth. The purple signified the sea, because that color is dyed by the blood of a seashell fish. The blue is fit to signify the air, and the scarlet will naturally be an indication of fire. Now the vestment of the high priest being made of linen signified the earth. The blue denoted the sky, being like lightning in its pomegranates, and in the noise of the bells resembling thunder. And for the ephod, it showed that God had made the universe of 4 elements, and as for the gold interwoven, I suppose it related to the splendor by which all things are enlightened. He also appointed the breastplate to be placed in the middle of the ephod, to resemble the earth, for that has the very middle place of the world. And the girdle which encompassed the high priest round signified the ocean, for that goes round about and includes the universe. Each of the sardonyxes declares to us the sun and the moon, those, I mean, that were in the nature of buttons on the high priest's shoulders. And for the 12 stones, whether we understand by them the months, or whether we understand the like number of the signs of that circle which the Greeks call the zodiac, we shall not be mistaken in their meaning. And for the meter, which was of a blue color, It seems to me to mean heaven, for how otherwise could the name of God be inscribed upon it? That it was also illustrated with a crown, and that of gold also, is because of that splendor with which God is pleased. Let this explication suffice at present, since the course of my narration will often, and on many occasions, afford me the opportunity of enlarging upon the virtue of our legislator. End of Book 3, Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of the Priesthood of Aaron. 1. When what has been described was brought to a conclusion, gifts not being yet presented, God appeared to Moses and enjoined him to bestow the high priesthood upon Aaron his brother, as upon him that best of them all deserved to obtain that honor on account of his virtue. And when he had gathered the multitude together, he gave them an account of Aaron's virtue, and of his goodwill to them, and of the dangers he had undergone for their sakes. Upon which, when they had given testimony to him in all respects, and showed their readiness to receive him, Moses said to them, O you Israelites, this work is already brought to a conclusion, in a manner most acceptable to God, and according to our abilities. And now, since you see that he is received into this tabernacle, we shall first of all stand in need of one that may officiate for us, and may minister to the sacrifices, and to the prayers that are to be put up for us. And indeed, had the inquiry after such a person been left to me, I should have thought myself worthy of this honor, both because all men are naturally fond of themselves, and because I am conscious to myself that I have taken a great deal of pains for your deliverance. But now God himself has determined that Aaron is worthy of this honor, and has chosen him for his priest, as knowing him to be the most righteous person among you. So that he is to put on the vestments which are consecrated to God, he is to have the care of the altars, and to make provision for the sacrifices, and he it is that must put up prayers for you to God, who will readily hear them, not only because he is himself solicitous for your nation, but also because he will receive them as offered by one that he hath himself chosen to this office. The Hebrews were pleased with what was said, and they gave their approbation to him whom God had ordained, for Aaron was of them all the most deserving of this honor, on account of his own stock and gift of prophecy, and his brother's virtue. He had at that time 4 sons, Nadab, Abihu, Eleazar, and Ithamar, 2. Now Moses commanded them to make use of all the utensils, which were more than were necessary to the structure of the tabernacle, for covering the tabernacle itself, the candlestick, and altar of incense, and the other vessels, that they might not be at all hurt when they journeyed, either by the rain or by the rising of the dust. And when he had gathered the multitude together again, he ordained that they should offer half a shekel for every man, as an oblation to God, which shekel is a piece among the Hebrews, and is equal to 4 Athenian drachmae. Whereupon they readily obeyed what Moses had commanded, and the number of the offerers was 605,550. Now, this money that was brought by the men that were free was given by such as were about 20 years old, but under 50, and what was collected was spent in the uses of the tabernacle. 3. Moses now purified the tabernacle and the priests, which purification was performed after the following manner. He commanded them to take 500 shekels of choice myrrh, an equal quantity of cassia, and half the foregoing weight of cinnamon and calamus. This last is a sort of sweet spice, to beat them small, and wet them with an hin of oil of olives. An hin is our own country measure, and contains 2 Athenian koahs, or congises. Then mix them together, and boil them, and prepare them after the art of the apothecary, and make them into a very sweet ointment, and afterward to take it to anoint and to purify the priests themselves, and all the tabernacle, as also the sacrifices. There were also many, and those of various kinds, of sweet spices, that belonged to the tabernacle, and such as were of very great price, and were brought to the golden altar of incense, the nature of which I do not now describe, lest it should be troublesome to my readers. But incense was to be offered twice a day, both before sun rising and at sun setting. They were also to keep oil already purified for the lamps, now 3 of which were to give light all day long upon the sacred candlestick before God, and the rest were to be lighted at the evening. 4. Now all was finished. Bezaleel and Aholiab appeared to be the most skillful of the workmen, For they invented finer works than what others had done before them, and were of great abilities to gain notions of what they were formerly ignorant of. And of these Bezaleel was judged to be the best. Now the whole time they were about this work was the interval of 7 months, and after this it was that was ended the first year since their departure out of Egypt. But at the beginning of the second year, on the month Xanthicus, as the Macedonians call it, but on the month Nisan, as the Hebrews call it, on the new moon, they consecrated the tabernacle and all its vessels, which I have already described. 5. Now God showed himself pleased with the work of the Hebrews and did not permit their labors to be in vain. Nor did he disdain to make use of what they had made, but he came and sojourned with them, and pitched his tabernacle in the holy house. And in the following manner did he come to it. The sky was clear, but there was a mist over the tabernacle only, encompassing it, but not with such a very deep and thick cloud as is seen in the winter season, nor yet in so thin a one as men might be able to discern anything through it, but from it there dropped a sweet dew, and such a one as showed the presence of God to those that desired and believed it. 6. Now when Moses had bestowed such honorary presents on the workmen, as it was fit they should receive, who had wrought so well, he offered sacrifices in the open court of the tabernacle, as God commanded him, a bull, a ram, and a kid of the goats, for a sin offering. Now I shall speak of what we do in our sacred offices, in my discourse about sacrifices, and therein shall inform men in what cases Moses bid us offer a whole burnt offering, and in what cases the law permits us to partake of them as of food. And when Moses had sprinkled Aaron's vestments himself and his sons with the blood of the beasts that were slain, and had purified them with spring waters and ointment, they became God's priests. After this manner did he consecrate them in their garments for 7 days together. The same he did to the tabernacle, and the vessels thereto belonging, both with oil first incensed, as I said, and with the blood of bulls and of rams, slain day by day one, according to its kind. But on the 8th day he appointed a feast for the people, and commanded them to offer sacrifice according to their ability. Accordingly, they contended one with another, and were ambitious to exceed each other in the sacrifices which they brought, and so fulfilled Moses' injunctions. But as the sacrifices lay upon the altar, a sudden fire was kindled from among them of its own accord, and appeared to the sight like fire from a flash of lightning, and consumed whatsoever was upon the altar. 7. Hereupon an affliction befell Aaron, considered as a man and a father, but was undergone by him with true fortitude. For he had indeed a firmness of soul in such accidents, and he thought this calamity came upon him according to God's will. For whereas he had 4 sons, as I said before, the 2 elder of them, Nadab and Abihu, did not bring those sacrifices which Moses bade them bring, but which they used to offer formerly, and were burnt to death. Now when the fire rushed upon them, and began to burn them, nobody could quench it. Accordingly they died in this manner. And Moses bid their father and their brethren to take up their bodies, to carry them out of the camp, and to bury them magnificently. Now the multitude lamented them, and were deeply affected at this their death, which so unexpectedly befell them. But Moses entreated their brethren and their father not to be troubled for them, and to prefer the honor of God before their grief about them. For Aaron had already put on his sacred garments. 8. But Moses refused all that honor which he saw the multitude ready to bestow upon him, and attended to nothing else but the service of God. He went no more up to Mount Sinai, but he went into the tabernacle, and brought back answers from God for what he prayed for. His habit was also that of a private man, and in all other circumstances he behaved himself like one of the common people, and was desirous to appear without distinguishing himself from the multitude, but would have it known that he did nothing else but take care of them. He also set down in writing the form of their government, and those laws by obedience, whereto they would lead their lives, so as to please God, and so as to have no quarrels one among another. However, the laws he ordained were such as God suggested to him. So I shall now discourse concerning that form of government and those laws. 9. I will now treat of what I before omitted, the garment of the high priest. For he, Moses, left no room for the evil practices of false prophets. But if some of that sort should attempt to abuse the divine authority, he left it to God to be present at his sacrifices when he pleased, and when he pleased to be absent. And he was willing this should be known, not to the Hebrews only, but to those foreigners also who were there. For as to those stones which we told you before, the high priest bare on his shoulders, which were sardonyxes, and I think it needless to describe their nature, they being known to every body, the one of them shined out when God was present at their sacrifices. I mean that which was in the nature of a button on his right shoulder, bright rays darting out thence, and being seen even by those that were most remote, which splendor yet was not before natural to the stone. This has appeared a wonderful thing to such as have not so far indulged themselves in philosophy as to despise divine revelation. Yet will I mention what is still more wonderful than this. For God declared beforehand, by those 12 stones which the high priest bare on his breast, and which were inserted into his breastplate, when they should be victorious in battle. For so great a splendor shone forth from them, before the army began to march, that all the people were sensible of God's being present for their assistance. Whence it came to pass that those Greeks, who had a veneration for our laws, because they could not possibly contradict this, called that breastplate the oracle. Now this breastplate, and this sardonyx, left off shining 200 years before I composed this book, God having been displeased at the transgressions of his laws, of which things we shall further discourse on a fitter opportunity, but I will now go on with my proposed narration. 10. The tabernacle being now consecrated, and a regular order being settled for the priests, the multitude judged that God now dwelt among them, and betook themselves to sacrifices and praises to God, as being now delivered from all expectation of evils, and as entertaining a hopeful prospect of better times hereafter. They offered also gifts to God, some as common to the whole nation, and others as peculiar to themselves, and these tribe by tribe, for the heads of the tribes combined together 2 by 2, and brought a wagon and a yoke of oxen. These amounted to 6, and they carried the tabernacle when they journeyed. Besides which, each head of a tribe brought a bowl and a charger and a spoon of 10 derricks full of incense. Now the charger and the bowl were of silver, and together they weighed 200 shekels, but the bowl cost no more than 70 shekels, and these were full of fine flour mingled with oil, such as they used on the altar about the sacrifices. They brought also a young bullock and a ram, with a lamb of a year old, for a whole burnt offering, as also a goat for the forgiveness of sins. Every one of the heads of the tribes brought also other sacrifices, called peace offerings, for every day 2 bulls and 5 rams, with lambs of a year old and kids of the goats. These heads of tribes were 12 days in sacrificing, one sacrificing every day. Now Moses went no longer up to Mount Sinai, but went into the tabernacle, and learned of God what they were to do, and what laws should be made, which laws were preferable to what have been devised by human understanding, and proved to be firmly observed for all time to come, as being believed to be the gift of God, insomuch that the Hebrews did not transgress any of those laws, either as tempted in times of peace by luxury, or in times of war by distress of affairs. But I say no more here concerning them, because I have resolved to compose another work concerning our laws. End of Book 3, Chapter 8, of the Priesthood of Aaron. Chapter 9, the manner of our offering sacrifices. 1. I will now, however, make mention of a few of our laws which belong to purifications and the like sacred offices, since I am accidentally come to this matter of sacrifices. These sacrifices were of 2 sorts. Of those sorts one was offered for private persons, and the other for the people in general. And they are done in 2 different ways. In the one case, what is slain is burnt, as a whole burnt offering, whence that name is given to it. But the other is a thank offering, and is designed for feasting those that sacrifice. I will speak of the former. Suppose a private man offer a burnt offering, he must slay either a bull, a lamb, or a kid of the goats, and the 2 latter of the first year, though of bulls he is permitted to sacrifice those of a greater age. But all burnt offerings are to be of males. When they are slain, the priests sprinkle the blood round about the altar. They then cleanse the bodies, and divide them into parts, and salt them with salt, and lay them upon the altar, while the pieces of wood are piled one upon another, and the fire is burning. They next cleanse the feet of the sacrifices, and the inwards, in an accurate manner, and so lay them to the rest to be purged by the fire, while the priests receive the hides. This is the way of offering a burnt offering. 2. But those that offer thank offerings do indeed sacrifice the same creatures, but such as are unblemished and above a year old. However, they may take either males or females. They also sprinkle the altar with their blood, but they lay upon the altar the kidneys and the caul, and all the fat, and the lobe of the liver, together with the rump of the lamb. Then, giving the breast and the right shoulder to the priests, the offerers feast upon the remainder of the flesh for 2 days, and what remains they burn. 3. The sacrifices for sins are offered in the same manner as is the thank offering. But those who are unable to purchase complete sacrifices offer 2 pigeons or turtle doves, the one of which is made a burnt offering to God, the other they give as food to the priests. But we shall treat more accurately about the oblation of these creatures in our discourse concerning sacrifices. But if a person fall into sin by ignorance, he offers an ewe lamb, or a female kid of the goats of the same age. And the priests sprinkle the blood at the altar, not after the former manner, but at the corners of it. They also bring the kidneys and the rest of the fat, together with the lobe of the liver, to the altar, while the priests bear away the hides and the flesh, and spend it in the holy place on the same day. For the law does not permit them to leave of it until the morning. But if anyone sin, and is conscious of it himself, but hath nobody that can prove it upon him, he offers a ram, the law enjoining him so to do, the flesh of which the priests eat as before in the holy place on the same day. And if the rulers offer sacrifices for their sins, they bring the same oblations that private men do, only they so far differ that they are to bring for sacrifices a bull or a kid of the goats, both males. 4. Now the law requires, both in private and public sacrifices, that the finest flour be also brought, for a lamb the measure of 1/10 deal, for a ram 2, and for a bull 3. This they consecrate upon the altar when it is mingled with oil, for oil is also brought by those that sacrifice, for a bull the half of an hin, and for a ram the 3rd part of the same measure, and 1/4 of it for a lamb. This hin is an ancient Hebrew measure, and is equivalent to 2 Athenian shoas, or conjuses. They bring the same quantity of oil which they do of wine, and they pour the wine about the altar. But if anyone does not offer a complete sacrifice of animals, but brings fine flour only for a vow, he throws a handful upon the altar as its first fruits, while the priests take the rest for their food, either boiled or mingled with oil, but made into cakes of bread. But whatsoever it be that a priest himself offers, it must of necessity be all burnt. Now the law forbids us to sacrifice any animal at the same time with its dam, and in other cases, not till the 8th day after its birth. Other sacrifices there are also appointed for escaping distempers, or for other occasions, in which meat offerings are consumed, together with the animals that are sacrificed, of which it is not lawful to leave any part till the next day, only the priests are to take their own share. End of Book 3, Chapter 9, The Manner of Our Offering Sacrifices. If you are following along in this series, be sure to continue to the next chapter as we move deeper into the laws, worship, and sacred practices of ancient Israel. Thank you for listening to the Antiquities of the Jews by Flavius Josephus, here on the Chronicles of Josephus audiobook.